It didn't start with a speech. It didn't come from a press conference or a budget meeting. It started in a hospital hallway in Delaware, sterile floors, humming lights, the kind of place where stories often go unnoticed. Joe Biden was visiting a small veterans clinic, away from the cameras, the kind of visit that rarely made the news. He'd been doing it for years quietly, sometimes on holidays, sometimes in the middle of legislative chaos. That day, a nurse named Carla whispered to him, "We've got a group in the East Wing you might want to see." They were waiting in silence, 9 patients, sitting in a sunlit room with thick glasses, walking canes, and faces turned toward voices instead of faces. All of them were blind. Some from birth, others from illness or war. But what connected them wasn't just blindness, it was waiting. Waiting for surgeries. Waiting for funding. Waiting for a future that kept being postponed. Biden sat with them. No speech. Just stories. A man named Felix who hadn't seen his wife's face in 12 years. A teenage girl, Andrea, who said her dream was to see the ocean just once. A mother who lost her vision to diabetes and spoke with her hands resting on her son's shoulders, as if that was how she saw him now. That night, something shifted. Not politically. Personally, because Biden, for all the policies and politics he carried, had always carried something else: grief. The kind of grief that taught him what it meant to lose and what it meant to still want to give. The next morning, he made a call that surprised even his closest advisors. He wanted to create a federal program, quiet, efficient, immediate, to fund vision-restoring surgeries for Americans who couldn't afford them. No red tape, no flashy rollout. Just results. Some pushed back. The optics, they said. The budget. The critics. But he didn't waver. He told them, "We've got billions for bombs. We can spare a few for miracles." And so it began. The program was officially called Vision Forward, tucked into an emergency health relief bill. At first, only a few hundred people applied. Then thousands. Veterans. Single parents. Children. Factory workers. People who had lost more than light, they had lost independence. Within 6 months, over 5,000 people had received sight-saving procedures. Retinal implants. Corneal grafts. Cataract removals. Lives changed, in silence. One man wrote a letter, "I saw my newborn son for the first time. Thank you, Mr. President." Biden didn't make a show of it. No campaign ads. No banners. Just quiet pride. He kept a folder of letters in his drawer. When meetings got tense, he sometimes opened it, but then something broke. A story leaked. A headline. Then a dozen more. Whistleblower claims vision program was misused. Biden accused of misappropriating emergency funds. Cite for votes. Critics slam Vision Forward program as political theater. The accusations came fast. An anonymous memo suggested that funds earmarked for other federal relief programs had been redirected without full congressional oversight. An audit began. Then a lawsuit. And before anyone could blink, the President of the United States, the man who brought light to thousands, was being accused of stealing it from others. They summoned him to testify. The media circled like sharks. Pundits shouted. Opponents called for resignation. Late-night hosts joked, "He gave them sight, now he'll need insight into prison law." But Biden didn't flinch. That he showed up in court, not with lawyers or lobbyists but alone, and that's when something happened no one expected. From the courthouse steps, a sound rose. Not chants. Not protests. Applause. Dozens of people gathered. Then hundreds. Then over 1,000. Not waving signs. Just standing. Silent. Holding photos. Some wore dark glasses. Others held white canes with flowers tied to them. They were the ones he helped. The ones who could now see because of him, and they were there to return the favor. They called it the trial of the year. Not because it promised drama but because no one could believe it was real. That a sitting U.S. president, standing trial not for war or scandal or betrayal but for giving people their sight back. And yet, there he was. Joseph R. Biden, flanked by plainclothes Secret Service agents, walking through a side entrance to the Washington, D.C. District Courthouse on a gray Tuesday morning. No tie. No lapel pin. Just a worn leather binder in his hand, the one with the letters, outside, the media swarmed. Every network had their banner graphics ready: Biden in court, healer or lawbreaker, vision trial, the fight for facts. Inside, the atmosphere was clinical. Cold marble. Pale wood. A judge with a tight expression and a reputation for impartiality. The room was packed. Press. Law students. Opponents. Supporters. Everyone wanted to see history unfold one way or another. The prosecution came in sharp. Calm. Calculated. Their argument was technical, not emotional. They claimed the Vision Forward program had bypassed formal budget approvals. That emergency funds, meant for broader public health infrastructure, had been selectively reallocated without proper congressional oversight. Their tone wasn't cruel, just precise. "No one here is against helping the blind," the lead prosecutor said. "But when power is used outside the boundaries of law, we must question intention. And hold leadership accountable." The room was still, then the defense rose. Not a fiery opening. Just a quiet outline of what was to come. "We will not deny the methods. But we will show the motive. And more importantly, we will show the impact." The attorney gestured to the back row of the courtroom, where a dozen individuals sat in silence. Some with sunglasses. Some blinking anxiously. Some gripping canes. One young girl clutched a Polaroid picture in her hands. The first witness was called. Her name was Carla Mitchell, 42, single mother of two, former social worker. She had gone blind due to a degenerative eye disease that stole her sight in her 30s. She testified with calm grace, hands folded in her lap. She told the court how she used to recognize her daughters by the sound of their footsteps. How she'd memorized the house layout, counting steps to every drawer, every shelf. How her world had become sounds and textures until the day she got the call. She paused. Then spoke softly, "I remember the day the bandages came off. I turned my head to the window, and saw light. Then shape. Then color. My daughter was standing there in a green sweater. I didn't know she had freckles. I didn't know her eyes looked just like her dad's." Silence. Vision Forward paid for that surgery. Fully. I could never have afforded it. And the man who pushed it through didn't ask for my vote. He just asked if I was ready. The second witness was Felix Alvarez, 61, retired Marine. He lost his sight after an IED blast in Afghanistan. For a decade, he lived in darkness. His voice was firm, controlled, but carried the weight of memory. "When I served, we were told to protect American lives. That's what leadership meant. And then I came home, and felt forgotten. Vision Forward changed that." He glanced toward Biden, who sat still at the defense table, eyes lowered. "I don't care how the funds were shuffled. I care that for the first time in years, I saw the flag at full color during morning taps. That matters. That's what real service looks like." More testimonies followed. A 12-year-old girl named Andrea, who had been blind since birth, and now described watching her dog chase butterflies. A 70-year-old teacher who had retired early due to vision loss but had returned to the classroom after successful surgery. A welder. A pianist. A librarian. A high school student who had learned to drive. Each story different but threaded by the same truth: they could see. Because someone decided the paperwork could wait. At one point, a lawyer for the prosecution asked one witness bluntly, "Do you believe good intentions justify bypassing law?" The witness replied, "Sometimes the law isn't fast enough for the people it claims to protect." That line echoed through the courtroom, but the most powerful moment came near the end of the third day. The judge, a woman named Ruth Holbrook, turned directly to President Biden. "Mr. President, you've heard the arguments. You've heard the testimonies. Before we move to closing statements, I'd like to hear from you directly. Why did you authorize the Vision Forward funds without standard congressional clearance?" The room held its breath. Biden stood. He didn't adjust his jacket. He didn't clear his throat. That he just looked at the judge, then at the people behind her, the gallery, the reporters, the citizens. And then he said, with the quiet force of a man who had nothing left to hide, "Because I was tired of waiting for permission to do the right thing." He took a breath. "I've sat in rooms where people begged for help and watched that help drown in committees, in delay, in red tape. I didn't create Vision Forward for politics. I created it because I saw people losing their lives in darkness while we argued over paperwork." His voice didn't rise. "If anything, it grew softer. If that means I broke a rule, then I accept that. But I will never apologize for giving people their world back. And if I had to do it again, I would." No applause. Just silence. Deep, complicated, human silence. When the judge called for recess, no one moved. And when Biden walked out, dozens of those he'd helped stood as he passed. Not because he was the president, but because he was the man who gave them back the sunrise. By the end of the week, the courthouse no longer felt like a building. It felt like a pressure chamber. Outside, the media had built a semi-permanent village: tents, cameras, food trucks, even folding chairs arranged like bleachers. Inside, the air was tense, almost reverent. Security had tripled. Cell phones were banned. Staff whispered. The nation wasn't just watching, it was holding its breath, because what started as an administrative case had become something else entirely. The testimonies had changed the narrative. Not just legally, culturally. The trial was no longer about one program, one president, or one piece of funding. It had become a referendum on leadership itself. On whether bending the rules in the name of compassion could ever be justified. On whether law was meant to preserve order or to protect people. The prosecution knew it. Their tone changed by day 5. Gone was the confident precision. In its place, caution. Nuance. "This is not a question of whether lives were changed," their final argument began. "It's a question of whether leaders can act without checks, without balance, whenever they believe the cause is righteous. Today it's blindness. Tomorrow? Who decides?" It was a sharp point. And it struck, but the defense leaned into something else. Not the law. Not the legacy. That we asked the court not to look at statutes, the closing statement began, but at the faces in this room. This program did not buy votes. It bought back life. And in the end, if justice cannot serve the living, then it becomes a museum, polished, sterile, and empty. The courtroom sat still. Even the judge's pen paused mid-note, and then, the unthinkable happened. On the morning the verdict was scheduled, news broke that a small regional health facility in rural Iowa, one that had recently received Vision Forward funding, reported that it had completed its 200th successful procedure. One of the patients, a retired farmer named Walt McKinney, had written a letter to the court. It wasn't official testimony. Just words, handwritten in big, careful loops. That it read, "I'm not good with politics. I vote how I feel. But I know this, I used to sit on my porch and listen to birds. Now I sit and watch them. That's because someone did something fast. Not perfect. But fast. And it worked." The letter was quietly delivered to the judge's chambers. No cameras. No headline. But the clerk who handled it said later, it felt heavier than paper. Inside the court, as the judge prepared her final remarks, something else began to unfold outside. They came slowly at first. Then more. Dozens. Then hundreds. People who had received surgeries through Vision Forward. Not with chance. Not with signs. Just presence. Some wore white armbands. Others carried sunflowers, a symbol that had begun circulating online as a tribute to those who live in light. Then something extraordinary. One by one, they formed a line around the courthouse. A human chain. Silent. Unified. Unmoving. By the time the judge stepped into the chamber, nearly 3,000 people stood outside, many of them still blinking into a world they could now finally see. She looked out through the high windows and saw them, and then, she spoke. Her voice was calm. Unshaken. But there was a tremble to the silence around it. This court recognizes the irregularities in how the Vision Forward program was initiated. It also recognizes that no funds were diverted for personal gain. No individual benefited financially. And most importantly, thousands of lives were measurably improved. This court does not exist to punish compassion when it is sincere and effective. A pause. President Biden acted outside normal channels. But not for power. For people. In consideration of intent, impact, and overwhelming testimony, this court finds the defendant not guilty on all charges. The gallery didn't erupt. It didn't shout. It stood slowly. Silently. Like a sunrise, Biden didn't smile. He simply nodded once, placed his hand on his binder of letters, and closed it. Outside, a woman who had once been blind turned her face to the sky and whispered, "Thank you." Not to a man. But to the moment. The verdict was barely 15 minutes old when headlines began to drop. Biden acquitted in Vision trial, not guilty but not forgotten, the blind who saw justice. But what those headlines didn't capture was the silence. The breath the nation seemed to take all at once. The moment when the noise stopped, and something deeper settled in its place. Joe Biden walked out of the courthouse without a fist pump, without a grin. Just a quiet nod to the crowd and a slow wave to the wall of people waiting outside, many of whom he hadn't seen since they were patients in shadows. Now they stood in the sunlight, some holding hands, some wiping their eyes, and he could see every one of them, that image of the president walking past a crowd of formerly blind supporters who could now finally look him in the eyes went viral before sundown. But it wasn't just shared. It was felt. Deeply. Not with the tribal glee of political victories, but with the quiet power of something rare in American life. Grace. In the days that followed, something strange happened. The media didn't rush to dig deeper. The late-night jokes stopped. Political commentators who had once attacked Biden for overreach now hesitated. "I don't agree with how he did it," one said on national TV, "but I can't argue with what he did." Even his harshest critics in Congress pulled back. Privately, aides leaked that members of both parties were relieved by the verdict. Not because they wanted Biden to win, but because they didn't want to be remembered for tearing down the only federal program in recent history that made thousands of people see again. Then came the letters, hundreds of them, thousands, from teachers, from veterans, from small-town mayors and clinic nurses and prison chaplains. Some typed, some handwritten in uneven lines by people still learning to write again with confidence now that they could read their own words. Some came with photos. Others with single sentences. One letter said simply, "He gave me back my daughter's face." And still, Biden didn't give a victory speech. No parade. No press conference. Instead, he made one request to his staff: "I want to visit where it began." 3 weeks later, under no spotlight, he returned to that small clinic in Delaware. No cameras. Just him, a couple of aides, and a nurse named Carla, the same woman who had introduced him to the patients that day so long ago. The East Wing was quieter now. The same room, the same windows. But this time, the chairs were empty. A plaque had been hung above the entrance. It read, "Vision Forward began here." With a question, not a policy. He stood there for a long time. Later that afternoon, he recorded a short message. Not for TV. Not for campaign ads. Just a message released online under the official seal, but delivered like a grandfather at the end of a kitchen table. "I didn't do this to win. I didn't even do it to be right. I did it because when someone tells you they haven't seen their child's face in 10 years, you don't ask for a policy memo. You ask where the line is to sign the check. That's leadership. That's government when it works. And if following that instinct put me on trial, then so be it. Because I will take that stand again. 1,000 times. The clip was viewed over 40 million times in 3 days, but the real legacy wasn't digital.it was human.in. In the months that followed, Vision Forward was expanded formally. Voted on. Signed into law with bipartisan support. Not just emergency funding this time, but full federal integration. Grants for research. Partnerships with nonprofit clinics. Scholarships for ophthalmology students who committed to working in underserved areas. The very same lawmakers who once called the program reckless, now proudly signed their names on the bill.in. Schools across the country, students studied it in civics classes not as a partisan issue, but as a case study in moral courage. In one university, a law professor paused after showing the trial footage and said, "This is what happens when the law meets life and life wins." 1 year later, on the anniversary of the verdict, something extraordinary happened. Over 5,000 people, all former Vision Forward patients, organized a nationwide campaign. Not political. Not commercial. Just a gesture. They called it Light Day. They asked Americans to spend 1 hour outside, phones off, eyes open. To look at the world, intentionally. A sky. A flower. A child's smile. And remember that sight is a gift, not a given. In cities and towns, people gathered in parks and sidewalks, sharing the hour together. Some wore white ribbons. Others simply stood in silence. And across every state, people began to say it softly, sometimes in surprise, "I never noticed how green that tree is. I forgot how much I love looking at clouds. I see you." Joe Biden never attended the official Light Day gatherings. He spent that day in private. But when asked later what it felt like to watch it all unfold, he smiled and said, "I didn't need to see it. I felt it. That's enough." And maybe that's the lesson that remained long after the last article faded, that leadership isn't always loud. That courage sometimes whispers. And that one decision born not of strategy, but of compassion can echo further than 1,000 speeches. They called it a scandal, they put him on trial, but in the end, it wasn't the law that saved Joe Biden. It was the people who could finally see and chose to look back.